Hello and welcome to another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. Today, we are rejoined by Mr. Clarence Haynes. And as you may recall, last time we had him on, he was talking about his book, Nubia, The Awakening. And during the conversation, left the door open for him to return, if he wants to discuss future projects. And sure enough, we're here to talk about his follow-up book today, Nubia, The Reckoning. And as far as my guest goes, if you're not familiar with him, he's actually teamed up on this project with actor and producer Omar Epps. And Clarence Haynes is actually the co-writer on both Nubia, The Awakening, and Nubia, The Reckoning. And we're just going to be talking with him today about, what brings him to this new project, the evolution of the character and things of that nature. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on Mr. Clarence Haynes. How you doing today?
I am great, William. Thank you so much for having me on again. It was such a pleasure to speak to you last time and now to return for book two of the series. So I'm thrilled, particularly considering the sensibilities of your of this show. So
Oh, well, thank you. No, we truly appreciate hearing Into the Afroverse coming back to talk about your next project. So, or your current project, which is your second book. So thank you. So let's get right to it. Uh, I'm gonna start at the end, so to speak. So with this newest book, Nubia the Reckoning's continuation of the first one, what has the response been?
in terms of the response to this latest installment.
Yes.
The response has been really good. We've just been, so it's been interesting because Omar, for the with the release of book two, did another round of really great publicity and getting the word out. And so, actually, for a lot of readers, they were discovering book one as well, in addition to learning about book two. So some people have bought the books in a complete set, and so they're making their way through both book one and book two. So they're like just getting to book two right about now. And then those who read the first book have gone into book two, and everyone is just I think the most consistent thing we've uh, read so far, the feedback we've gotten is that people want it to continue. It's technically for now two books, and we'll see if it will the series will go on. But that's first and foremost what we consistently see is like, okay, y'all aren't gonna end it here. And then I think what's also coming up is we've continued to deal with some of the issues that we brought up in the first book, and continue to really maintain a certain, hopefully you'll be seen as a certain quality of world building. But then we've gotten a bit edgier. We do some twists and turns. Omar, there were some things that even from the very beginning, Omar knew that he's like, this is what we're going to do with book two. He knew way ahead of time. And so we were able to finally implement that, but along the way, just really really throw some things in there that people aren't expecting, but yet we seeded in book one. And then, also people, the other thing we've heard or read in terms of reviews, or people are appreciating sort of the deepening of the characters and the expanding of different powers and the introduction of new characters. So with the book taking place in a futuristic New York where the descendants of African refugees awaken to special gifts and abilities they didn't know that they would have. With book one, we introduced that concept. Now in book two, these characters are getting to know their abilities better. They're getting to explore them in ways that they didn't realize that they would be able to. And then also we're introducing new characters, which is, pretty standard for series that as you go along, you want to make sure that you're expanding the world. So we have some new characters with new abilities, who are part of the community, and also we're sort of able to do some interesting world building things with that as well. So the response, all that to say, the response has been overwhelmingly positive, which has given me great joy, a bit of a relief as well, because sometimes you don't know and you
Right.
do these things. Omar is much is calmer than I am, and you don't know and what the reception will be, but thankfully it looks like we really uh, we really seem to have made readers happy. So
Excellent, excellent. And if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And today we are joined by Mr. Clarence A. Haynes, author of Nubia, The Awakening, and the follow-up book, Nubia, The Reckoning. So let me ask you this. I want to go back a little bit. What was the inspiration behind both of these books in terms of this idea of this reawakening of it's superpowers, but it's also like a reawakening, I guess, of one's heritage and one's
absolutely.
bloodline. So what was the inspiration behind that? What was that thought process like?
So Omar, the concept of there being a Nubia where people, there were a group of a community, an expansive community of people who lived in perfect harmony with the universe, was Omar's love letter to Black people, to the diaspora, to our roots. And so he wanted to come up with something that showcased where we're from and what we're capable of in a metaphorical way, and of course also, and using the term Nubia to honor the real, there's a real world, a real ancient kingdom named Nubia that I would encourage everyone to look up and find out more about, which had major influences on Egypt, for instance. And so this was something that was important um, to Omar. And then as we developed the book with our publisher, with each other, of course, one thing that happens is you want things, Omar wanted things, the community to be perfect. And at one point they're living in a sense of perfection. But of course, when you're dealing with a story, you have to complicate the narrative and you have to create conflict, and people are human beings and they're going to make mistakes. And so um, even with that, we still wanted to do something that touched on the greatness of Black communities of the diaspora, people of African descent. What's happened, I can also say now with book two, is that for the world that we've created, we now, in book two, one of the big things also that people were relieved about, because they were asking about this for book one, there was a lot of, okay, we didn't get a lot about the background of Nubia and what life was like there and how the society worked. And we get a lot more of that now in book two, through flashbacks that are presented via the eyes of a Nubian elder named Adisa, which is I won't give away how that exactly happens, but it's definitely mystical in nature. And so so we were able to do that, but also some in terms of this futuristic New York, and then younger Nubians awakening to their powers, the dynamics of how they're using their powers for the community, and how they're sort of um, being perceived, and the choices they're making. We also purposely constructed things so that it's paying homage to community activism, to groups that have, at the forefront of their mission was to help those who are marginalized. And we start to see that there are Nubians who do that. So, for instance, there's a young Nubian named Leonard who has the power to control vegetation, who starts a free community garden in this area that before, no one was trying to really help out. And so people have access now to free food basically because of him. And so Nubians are beginning to be perceived in a way that's actually positive, in a way that was never the case before. And we purposely wanted to make a statement around, okay, what would be the choices that they would make that would also speak to, across history, anytime you have groups who are placed in sections of society where, through no fault of their own, they're left with lack of resources. There are always groups, organizations who rise up and say, we're going to help out. We're going to create opportunities for our community. We're going to agitate. We're going to make sure we announce what our needs are. And so we wanted to speak to those movements and as the book progressed.
So I'm hearing like a Black Panther Party.
There was, yes, because I was saying, of course, the breakfast program.
Yes.
There's definitely, people who read it will. Some people may not realize, but that was definitely an influence in terms of the actions of some of the characters. And then, of course, we wanted it to not always overtly call out these things, but I think for those who are paying attention, they'll be like, "Oh, this is what they're referencing or honoring." So,
no, that's and for me, that's what makes books and other forms of entertainment work, where I gotta, like read between the lines and figure some things out. Yeah, when you put it out front like that, that's not as enjoyable. So I certainly get your point. Was there greater pressure with the second book? Oftentimes, the first one, of course, comes with its own issues, its own challenges in writing that first book. But did you see this follow-up? Did you feel pressure to top it? Was it more difficult? Because you said, maybe some things that you felt like you could have done better with the first one, or things that you learned from the first one. What was it like in writing the second book compared to the first?
So the first one, I would say Omar and I and the publisher, we were figuring out like exactly what the flow would be, the process, and that in and of itself took time, just because anytime you have a collaborative project and when you're doing major world building, it's just a process. And so what was, different about the once by the time we got to the second book, I would say we were more in the flow.
Okay.
I think there was definitely just established trust between Omar and myself, and so we were just able to move more quickly. That was one of the biggest things. So they would literally just be, he would sometimes say something and I'd be like, "Oh, you mean blah blah blah?" And he'd be like, "Yeah," and da da da, and I'm like, "Bet," and da da.
Right.
It would just flow in a way.
Gotcha.
Before, where we were still learning each other, and now we just know each other's sensibilities, and so we were able to move. And then I think what was really, what I'm so heartened by is, I'm from New York from a certain time, and there's always, both Omar and I just have a sense of, like, even books for kids, you got to keep it real, you got to be authentic. You can't be afraid of edge. You can't be afraid of keeping readers on their toes. I think that's actually what they yearn for and expect nowadays. And so that was the biggest thing with book two. We just wanted to make sure that it was just a read where people would be like, "What?" Like, book one, we had to do so much with, like, okay, let's make sure everyone knows the situation with each of these four characters. The book is told through the perspective of four different characters. And so with book two, it was sort of like, okay, we bring people up to speed. We do some recapping in the beginning, but then we're like, all right, we've done the background work, so we're just gonna move. And so that's what I would say. The big for me, I just felt like, okay, we've created the foundation, then we got to just make this, when people read it, just be like, what, wait a minute,
Right.
I wasn't. And so that was the pressure that I felt. But thankfully, as I said, because there was a higher level of trust, and I felt like it was a easier process then. And then even just in terms of the time frame, once the publisher was like, you know what, this is the date we think book two needs to come out. And we didn't have a lot of time. And I was like, what?
Right.
But we did
Right.
it. But a lot of that just had to do with the connection was already established. So
So when book one was written, did you have two in mind? Was it already planned? And you kind of mentioned that you may be working on a third one. Do you have a third one in mind, or it's kind of, since, like you said, it's world building, there's room to grow, not necessarily if you don't want to, but is there a plan in terms of three or four more books or whatever the case might be?
So I will leave to Mr. Epps in
Okay.
terms of answering in any real depth. But what I can say is that the way we ended book two, there definitely we can continue to go on, and that was we purposely did that
Gotcha.
because we just knew the story was so rich, and the publisher was very fine with that.
Good.
The story is just so rich, and there was just so many things that we could continue to explore that there was no way that we were going to try to wrap up everything. So yeah, so it was just very clear, like, yeah, okay, so
Right.
we definitely, the main conflict of book two is resolved, but we can continue to explore. There's a character named Saja, who's a teleporter, and they have a thing happening with their particular ability that we've hinted at. There's a lot more to explore.
Right. Right.
So little thing like sort of subtle theme, subtle subplot, little things here and there that we've left that we can continue to run with
Gotcha.
if we have the opportunity.
So obviously, like you said, there's been a great deal of success with the first book and now the second book. But what is it, in your opinion, that separates your book from the pack, so to speak? Because there's a lot of science fiction out there. There's a lot of young adult novels and so forth. And Afrofuturism is growing in terms of, books, movies, and so forth. But as far as books go, in your opinion, what is it about your book that kind of stands out and, like I said, separates itself from the pack?
I love I love that question, William. So a number of things. I think you hit it right in the head. Afrofuturism is growing. It's still such a new phenomenon, and I just think so. First and foremost, I'm just so appreciative that we're part of like the trailblazing path. There really isn't. Most people probably don't realize this as of yet. There's hardly any young adult Afrofuturist titles out there. There's just not a lot. Most of them that are out there would be considered for adults or maybe comics, but in terms of like a prose young adult novel, there aren't many. And so that first and foremost is quite unique for the Nubius series. Also, the fact that we uh, highlight the voices of two young Black men
Mhm.
is really big as well, and that we're two male authors doing this.
Right.
That the dynamics of how they're presented are purposely meant to subvert expectations. So the main character, Uzochi, is gentle. Is his first he's his first instinct is really to love and then to use his intelligence and intellect. He's not super aggressive and assertive, and he's the leader of this burgeoning community. It's his the person he's developing romance with Zubedi, who's the tough character, and she, you know.
Right.
So we there are just things that we're playing with that we wanted to really subvert these ideas of black boyhood that have been so toxic and destructive, and really make sure that we were doing something so that people could just feel like, oh, this is a breath of um fresh air, you know. So those are some of the things. And the another huge thing is there aren't um I can't think off the top, there aren't many, I don't believe, Afrofuturist books. I'm not sure how many of them, I could be wrong about this, but we deal very specifically, particularly in book one, with the effects of climate change on what a huge metropolis will look like, and we explore that really, really in depth for teen readers. And so that's another huge thing. And so that's another thing that's been very heartening as well in terms of feedback, is that people who are cli-fi readers and who are climate activists have read it and really, really impressed by some of the visions presented, and what we've in the narrative, how we've outlined what a change New York might look like. So those are some of the things I think makes the book stand out. But then even with all of that, even with all the things I've just said, I would say something I'm very proud of is the characters feel real. The characters feel like people you'd be sitting with, you would know, even with the power, and even like we take lots of time to really, really make these characters really flesh and blood and feel as authentic as possible. And they're not stupid, which I know some people say in YA, like the teenagers make these decisions.
Right.
Like, why would you do that? And none of our characters are dumb. None of them do things just to silly things to advance the plot. Like they all are real people, are real,
Right.
intelligent, people who are just figuring things out as they go along. So
Oh, that is excellent. And we definitely need more books that address climate change. I mean, I'm no scientist, but when you wearing 3 or 4 different outfits in the same day because the weather keeps changing, something's going on. So I'm glad that you're addressing that and talking about it.
yeah, so it was deep, like around the time the paperback of book one actually just came out in August, and then the hardcover of book two came out less than 2 months later, which our publisher wanted to do that so that they'd be seen as, people would have the opportunity to get them hand in hand. And not long after the paperback came out, we had those I don't know if you heard, but like there was a Friday where we had like nonstop rain
Oh
one
yeah,
morning, and the
yes.
streets of New York were just completely flooded. And that's what the prologue of book one. That's how it starts, with a there's a warning system about if it rains too much, and then how destructive, like for people in the swamp, like how frightening it is when it just rains and rains and rains. And Omar's mother had said, because she had to cancel a trip because of those, and she's like, what did you summon with your book? So yeah, so
Right.
it was, and I told her, I was like, Omar, you do know this
Wow.
is how the book starts, like. And so he's like, yeah. And so yeah, so it's scary, but at the same time, I think we just need to reckon with what our realities are going to be,
Yes.
and then to make some really informed decisions around how to mitigate, and then how to prepare as well, so.
And that's a great thing about being an artist like yourself, where you're taking on that responsibility to, look at the world as it is today and uh, provide a warning when you can see like, oh, we're going off the rails in this direction or that direction. So it never ceases to amaze me how science fiction authors, Afrofuturistic authors, are able to tap in and see the future and predict it so correctly. And I mean, this is in a relatively short period of time when you talk about your first book and the flooding that took place in New York. So yeah, that's incredible. Believe it or not, we are actually coming up on the close. It goes so quickly. Uh,
Wow.
but I do have a question. I have a couple of questions. And once again, I'm inviting you back. And you were so cool to grace us by coming back. So I'm inviting you back yet again because there's so many questions that I have that I want to ask you. But one thing that comes to mind as I'm listening, are there any plans to expand this into an animated series, action figures? Because I'm hearing superheroes, I'm thinking action figures. Are there any plans to take it beyond the realm of the printed word?
So I will just say that is the domain. Anything with, because of course, as you can imagine, we get a lot of questions around. So it's going to be a film, TV show,
Right.
and exactly. I love your question. Animated figures, anything around that, I leave to Mr. Epps. I always tell people I'm the book person. My
Gotcha.
responsibilities have always been
Gotcha.
I make
Gotcha.
sure that the book we get the book done as much
Right.
of that, as much, and then he handles all the rest because it's
Yes.
his baby. So
Right.
but I will just say I think I can say we are open to all of that,
Yeah.
and he's doing his thing. He's a very, very hardworking person. One of the biggest inspiring things working with Omar is, I'm like, wow, okay, his work ethic is wow. So he has that in his brain. I know.
Well, if it means anything, you tell Mr. Epps I'm requesting an anime series and some action figures. I got room on the shelf. I want some action figures. So you can tell him if that means anything that William Jones
It
wants an
does.
action figure.
It
Yes.
does. And he is so hyped about just the response from everybody. And Omar is Mr. Cool. And then I'm like, oh, I can tell when he's hyped.
Right. Right. That is
so
great.
so yeah, I'll let him know.
Excellent. So, any final words? Because we got a few more minutes. Any final words you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, I just hope that people will check out the series, get to know the characters. I'm on social media, Clarence A. Haynes, and I am always make myself available to answer any questions that people have about the books, both younger readers and adult readers. We tended to have both. So many of the readers are actually adults, even though it's technically a YA book. And yeah, and I just hope they allow themselves to get swept away. I think people, as I've mentioned before, both the Awakening and the Reckoning are told from the perspective of 14 characters, and three of them awaken to their gifts, and that develops in the Reckoning as well. But you'll also see that it's not the gifts in and of themselves aren't the point. It's really about the journey of these characters and how they deal with legacy,
Mhm.
how they deal with things that they had no control over, but yet they were born into, and then with what they have, the choices that they make, and really, how at the end of the day, how you become a hero while honoring who you are. Like so, that's my my leaving thoughts
I
for this go
appreciate it.
round.
Once again, sir, thank you so much for coming back. And like I said, the door is always open to come back and talk about anything you'd like to talk about, future projects or whatever the case might be. So once again, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. And please make sure you go check out two books, Nubia the Awakening and Nubia the Reckoning by Mr. Clarence A. Haynes and Omar Epps. So that'll do it for us on Into the Alphaverse. And folks are always asking, what can they do to support the show? Well, you can go to the website, afrofuturismnet.com, because we're part of a bigger company, Afrofuturism Network. So you can go to the website for Afrofuturism Network and see how to support there. And also, if you want to hear some past episodes, please go to the YouTube channel, Afrofuturism Network. And you'll see all the great guests like Mr. Haynes and others right there on YouTube. So once again, folks, have a good day, and shout out to Mr. Duke Productions for producing today's episode. Take care.